So, Chris, from the time you got in the business, what's been the biggest change in our profession?
If I summed it up, I would say that journalism is no longer rooted in verifiable fact. Whether it was on TV, whether it was in the National Review, whether it was in the New York Times where I used to work, at least the argument was rooted in fact. That's gone. And that's a seismic change.
When did you notice that shift happening in journalism? I mean, is there a moment? Was there an event? Was there, what started it all?
So the economic model, especially for newsprint, began to crumble with the arrival of the internet. 40% of revenue from newspapers came from classified ads. So almost 50% of your revenue disappears. Then as the internet becomes more sophisticated through algorithms, you no longer, newsprint or news organizations no longer have a monopoly connecting sellers with buyers. And so you see the large regional papers, Philadelphia Inquirer, Boston Globe, these were very papers that had foreign correspondents. They're diminished, anemic would not be too harsh a word, and the business began to change. And I think it was driven by economics. You had large corporations buying up, especially electronic media. They were one revenue stream, sometimes among hundreds of revenue streams. They began to be judged not by their news content, but by how they competed against those revenue streams. For me, the electronic media has ceased doing journalism. Certainly its priority is not journalism. And newsprint has been floundering and struggling. And then I would say the O.J. Simpson trial was huge. Because,
really?
Yes, because that got outsized media attention even by the New York Times. It was this soap opera, this reality television, although of course it was a courtroom drama, but that's what it was. And you saw a shift, especially in the electronic media, towards those kinds of ongoing narratives. Look, we had 2 years of the Mueller report and Russiagate, where according to CNN and all of these networks, Mueller was going to charge in the White House and lead Trump out in handcuffs, and all of which was. And now, of course, we've got the Ukraine and the. They need those kind of ongoing soap operas, that ongoing reality, and that's why. And Trump played it very well in 2016. In fact, he was better at it than any of the other candidates. And there is this kind of love-hate relationship with Trump because Trump makes them a lot of money. So I'm talking about the electronic media.
Right.
The New York Times, its tone has changed since I worked there. The way for instance, we never could call anyone a liar. It was almost this Byzantine court code. So you would say if someone claimed something, it meant that it was a lie. That's all out the window. There's a snarkier tone to it. They clearly see their role as a paper. I mean, they've been quite, Dean Baquet, the editor, has been quite upfront about it, as a moral imperative to challenge Trump. There's been, and I began as a reporter in El Salvador in the early 1980s. It's almost unrecognizable, the profession. I think you would agree with me that journalism, real journalism, has already been pushed so far to the margins. And now with the abolition of net neutrality, the imposition of algorithms by Google and Facebook, coupled with these anonymous sites like Prop or Not, tarring journalists as foreign agents, we're seeing even that last readout of the press being crushed. How did that happen? What are the consequences, and where are we going?
Well, I want to preface my reply by saying that I have never seen anything like the moment that we're living through. I mean, having studied the media in this country for decades, and of course, having lived with it all my life, as you have, I can't really find the words to convey my astonishment at the constant hurricane of propaganda in whose eye we're all living on a daily basis. And as you note, the all-pervasive, strident stigmatization of those who dare to depart from the official story, even to look into it, much less to contradict it vocally.
I just want to interrupt there, because when I began, now 3, maybe almost 4 decades ago as a journalist, and I worked for the New York Times, as you know, these were not welcoming institutions, and yet there was space within them, however much we were harassed, however much we were marginalized within. And it seems to me that just that space has closed to almost nothing in terms of what is acceptable in what you cover.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think that one day soon we'll be able to look back, take a comprehensive look at the history of, for example, the New York Times, and see how there were indeed parts, sectors within the institution, within the newspaper every day, where one had a certain amount of latitude, you know.
A difference would be that newspapers have suffered severe economic decline.
Right. That's right.
Because of the internet, and because they no longer have a monopoly connecting sellers with buyers. That monopoly is gone.
That's right.
So I would point to that economic decline. Classified advertising alone wiped out 40% of most newspaper revenue as essentially making them far more compliant.
Well, that's absolutely true. I think these things are very difficult to extricate from one another. There's no question that the commercial press is, a kind of a starveling now because they don't have the advertising revenue they used to have that was sufficient to at least keep them fully staffed, right? We know that a few years ago, the New York Times let go of something like 113 reporters. And you can see it today. The newspaper is a pamphlet.
Well, and the big city papers, I was in the Philadelphia Inquirer newsroom before they went to the new building, and they had 750 desks, of which about 500 were empty.
Yeah, that's really depressing.
The news, if you want to call it news, is just one revenue stream out of perhaps hundreds of revenue streams. And they compete against those revenue streams, not for producing anything of quality, but for producing profit.
I would argue that as the press has vanished into the media cartel that you mentioned, it's like 6 transnational corporations that control something like 90% of the content that we ingest daily. As the media cartel has become more concentrated and more profit-focused, I think it has simultaneously also become closer and closer to the state, to government authority.
Well, we know that from all the pundits they bring on.
Well, exactly.
Who are not only retired military, well, look, we have Brennan,
right,
now on MSNBC.
That's right.
The former CIA director, as an analyst.
Well, as an analyst. And I want to add parenthetically that Trump has performed an invaluable function in all this because Trump enables the press to get up on its high horse,
right,
count his lies, his countless stupid, glaring, obvious lies that are about nothing, and then pat themselves on the back as if the far fewer, far more dangerous lies that they routinely tell are not lies. So Trump enables the corporate press to pose as honest, as truth tellers, and he also enables the CIA and the FBI to look like our champions, like they're going to save us from Russia.
Well, you've watched liberals all fall to their knees.
That's another aspect of the present moment that I find jaw-dropping, is that it's liberals now who are acting like the Birchers of the early 50s.
Yeah.
Never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest lie the press is telling is the lie of omission, in the sense that they are not addressing the fundamental mechanisms that are deforming not only our economy and our political system, which is this corporate coup d'etat, but globally. It's never mentioned. It's never talked about. Right. Capitalism is a word you're never going to hear.
Well, that's right. I would say that the things that we tend to talk about the least, because the press has blacked them out, are what pose the gravest threat to us. I think that's absolutely true.
You know, there's some people out there that say journalism is dead. Is it dead? Can it be saved? How can we save it? What do you think?
Journalism is in serious trouble, maybe even on life support. Mm-hmm. There are people who still do journalism.
Mm-hmm. You as being one of them.
But you're pushed to the margins, mm-hmm. And I worry, especially about investigative journalism, which is a skill that takes some time to hone. Mm-hmm. And it's So yeah, I mean, we've replaced, I would say, especially on the commercial electronic media, journalism with info entertainment. There's very little journalism done. If we look at the core of journalism being about amplifying and lifting up the voices who without us would not have a voice, because it's not commercially viable to talk about half the country living in near poverty or poverty, we get these endless chattering courtiers about, well, now in the middle of the impeachment, but before it was the Mueller report, but it doesn't have anything to do. It's completely disconnected with the lives of at this point, the average citizen. And their voices are not being reflected in the commercial media because it doesn't drive viewership and it's not entertaining. And so, yeah, I'm extremely worried about a profession that I've spent my life in and that I care deeply about and that I think is vital to an open society. Yeah, there's no difference anymore between fact and opinion, and that wall has been shattered, and that characterizes the information systems of totalitarian societies.
And Chris, as a consumer, they're going to be asking, who can I trust? Can I trust them? Can anybody out there be trusted that says they're part of the media? Who can we trust, and how can we know if we can trust them?
Well, I certainly wouldn't trust people, on your television screen who are making $10 million a year. And, we can name them, Rachel Maddow and others. There are great journalists out there. Matt Taibbi, I think, is a very fine journalist. Max Blumenthal. There are others, but they are on the margins, on the fringes of the media landscape, because they are not going to be backed by commercial or corporate interests. So yes, they are still there, but they're not there in great number, and they're not given the kind of prominence they should.
There's a certain desperation at the top as things are definitely coming to an end. This is an unsustainable system, economically and environmentally, and in many other ways. And the sins of the elites against all the rest of us are so egregious and so many that they're really showing a kind of frenzy in their attempts to silence those who dare to tell the truth. What we're seeing now is it's a very interesting thing. People can still find the other side or the other sides of the story by going online, right?
Right.
They can go through social media, even though Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Google are now doing everything they can to make that kind of content
and the abolition of net neutrality.
Yeah, that too. That's right. All of that is happening, and I characterize it in the following way. I have a lot of Chinese students at NYU, and they are well aware of how the Chinese state.
Well, they've perfected it.
It's explicit in China.
Yeah.
It is overt. It is an all-powerful party that dominates the state, and nobody is in the dark about the fact that they are policing the internet. They have an enormous police force to take care of that, right? We don't have that here. We have a First Amendment. So it takes a lot more sophistication. It requires a kind of inexplicit, gradual, piecemeal silencing of inconvenient voices. What our elites are trying to do is ultimately no different from what China's doing, right? But the fact is they have to do it in a way that looks sort of democratic, that looks tolerant of free speech, and that looks even necessary to save us from the Nazis or from Russia or whatever it is. But, demonizing dissidents as conspiracy theorists is part of that.
Well, you and I have been hit with that. Thanks, Mark.
Many times.